Dear first grade students at the Faculty of Commerce at Banha University in both Banha campus and Darfur campus, welcome to the recorded lecture series for the module entitled Economics of Natural Resources and the Environment. As you already know, recorded lectures are used in conjunction with face-to-face interactive lectures in our hybrid educational system. The recorded lecture is to be used in conjunction with your core textbooks. I would like to bring to your attention that the current course is designed to be accessible to students who have not completed any introductory course in economics. For this reason, I use the simplest words and examples when discussing all issues relating to the environmental and economic resources. Main sources of the current presentation are Chapter 2 of Tittenberg and Lewis, 2018, and Chapters 16 and 17 of Parkin, 2011. By the end of the current lecture, students should be knowledgeable of new concepts such as rival, excludable, and government failure. Moreover, students will be able to differentiate between public goods and private goods. Furthermore, they should be aware of the tragedy of the commons. There are four general property rights regimes that create different incentives for resource use or misuse of the resource. These four regimes are private property regimes, state property regimes, common property regimes, and open access regimes. We will discuss the last three regimes in the next slides. With regard to the first regime, that is the state property regimes, the government owns and controls the property. These regimes exist not only in former communist countries such as the former Soviet Union, but also these regimes exist to varying degrees in virtually all countries around the world. For example, parks and forests are frequently owned and run by the government in both capitalist and socialist countries. However, problems with both efficiency and sustainability can arise in these regimes when the incentives of bureaucrats diverge from collective interests. Common property resources could be defined as resources that are shared and managed in common rather than privately. In other words, the property is jointly owned and managed by a specified group of co-owners. Entitlements to use common property resources are likely to be formal and informal. Formal entitlements are protected by specific legal rules, whereas informal entitlements are protected by tradition or custom. Common property regimes are quite variable. Degrees of efficiency and sustainability depend on the rules that emerge from collective decision making. Some successful examples of common property regimes exist. However, unsuccessful examples are even more common. One successful example of a common property regime involves the system of allocating grazing rights in Switzerland. Normally, agricultural land is treated as private property, although in Switzerland grazing rights on the alpine meadows have been treated as common property for centuries. Overgrazing is restricted by specific rules agreed by an association of users. These rules limit the amount of livestock permitted on the meadow. The families included in the membership list of the association have been stable over time, and thus rights and responsibilities have passed from one generation to another. Such stability has apparently facilitated trust and thus providing a foundation for the continuous agreement with the rules. Unfortunately, that kind of stability is considered to be the exception rather than the rule, particularly in the face of heavy population pressure. Heavy population pressure tends to lead to the overexploitation of the resource, overfishing in local fisheries, or overhunting are good examples. Let's consider the experience of Mawal, which is a small fishing village in Sri Lanka. Initially, an effective rotating system of fishing rights was created by villagers to guarantee equitable access to the best spot and best times while protecting the fish stocks. Over time, population pressure raised the demand and weakened the collective cohesion sufficiently. Therefore, the traditional rules became unenforceable. The result was overexploitation of the resource and thus lower incomes for all the participants. Under open access property regimes, resources can be exploited on a first come, first served basis. This because no individual or group has the legal powers to restrict access. In other words, no one owns or exercises control over the resource. This type of regime leads to the tragedy of the commons, because common resources can be exploited by whoever can get them first. Thus, the tragedy of the commons could be defined as the absence of incentives to prevent the overuse and depletion of a commonly owned resource. When nobody owns a resource, each individual consumer fails to consider the full opportunity cost of consuming it, so the resource is consumed at a higher than inefficient rate. The term tragedy of the commons comes from 14th century England. Grassland near a town were called the commons because they were publicly accessible by all villagers to support their livestock. Because the commons were open to all, no one had an incentive to ensure that the land was not overgrazed. Therefore, the result was a severe overgrazing situation. Due to overgrazing of the commons, the quantity of cows and sheep that they could feed kept falling. The 16th century witnessed a rise in the price of wool, and England became a wool exporter to the world. Accordingly, sheep farming became profitable, and sheep owners wanted to gain more effective control of the land they used. Thus, the commons were gradually privatized and enclosed. Overgrazing ended and land use became more efficient. Thus, we could say that common pool resources are characterized by non-exclusivity and divisibility. Non-exclusivity implies that resources can be exploited by anyone, whereas divisibility means that the amount captured by an individual or group will be eliminated from the original amount available. Examples of resources that share the characteristics of common pool resources and the tragedy of the commons are unrestricted hunting access of the American bison, unregulated groundwater withdrawal, and high seas fisheries. The mentality associated with these open access resources is get it while the getting is good, and if I don't get it, someone else will. The asset value of the resource is essentially zero since non-exclusivity implies that it can't be saved for later. Of course, there are different methods that society can use to achieve the efficient outcome for common resources. These different methods will be discussed later during the current course. Now, let's differentiate between public and private goods. To understand the difference between them, let's consider some examples. First, could you identify the difference between a city police department and Falcon's security? Second, what is the main difference between fish in the River Nile and fish in a fish farm in Aswan that is owned by an association or a union? Third, could you find the key difference between a live concert and a concert on the state TV? Well, these and all goods and services can be classified according to, first, whether they are excludable or non-excludable. Second, whether they are rival or non-rival. Let's discuss the meaning of these new concepts in the following slides. A good is said to be excludable if only the people who pay for it are able to enjoy its benefits. In contrast, a good is said to be non-excludable if it is impossible or extremely costly to prevent anyone from benefiting from it. Examples of excludable goods include Falcon's security services, fish in a fish farm that is owned by an association, and a live concert. Examples of non-excludable goods are the services of Nasr City Police Station, fish in the Nile River, and a concert on the state TV. A good is said to be rival if one person's use of it decreases the quantity available for someone else. In contrast, a good is said to be non-rival if one person's use of it does not decrease the quantity available for someone else. Examples of rival goods include a Falcon's truck. This truck cannot deliver cash to two banks at the same time, and a fish which cannot be consumed more than once. Examples of non-rival goods include the security services of police stations in Nasr City and a concert on the state TV. Now, we could differentiate between public goods and private goods. A public good could be defined as a good that is both non-rival and non-excludable. In other words, a public good can be consumed simultaneously by everyone and no one can be excluded from consuming it. Examples of public goods include national defense, which is the best example of a public good. Regarding private goods, a private good could be defined as a good which is both rival and excludable. A can of Coke and a fish on a swan farm are examples of private goods. Environmental resources exhibit both consumption indivisibilities and non-excludability. Non-excludability refers to circumstances where once the resource is provided, even those who fail to pay for this resource cannot be excluded from enjoying its benefits. Consumption is said to be indivisible when one person's consumption of a good or service does not decrease the amount available for others. Examples of environmental resources are clean air, clean water, and biological diversity. Biological diversity includes the amount of genetic variability among individuals within a single species and the number of species within a community of organisms. Genetic diversity is of crucial importance to species survival in the natural world. Moreover, genetic diversity is important in the development of new crops and livestock. It improves the chances for crossbreeding and therefore the development of superior strains such as a disease-resistant barley. Now, we will briefly discuss the genetic diversity as a public good and whether it is possible to rely solely on the private sector to produce the efficient amount of it. Due to the interdependence of species within ecological communities, any particular species may have a value to the community far beyond its intrinsic value. Let me explain this point. What I mean is that some species contribute balance and stability to their ecological communities through providing food sources and medicines. However, significant evidence indicates that biological diversity is decreasing. So, how to overcome such a problem? Is it possible to rely solely on the private sector to produce the efficient amount of public goods such as biological diversity? Unfortunately, the answer is no. A competitive market is not expected to supply the efficient level of this good. Why? Well, a competitive market is not expected to provide the efficient level of biological diversity because of the problem of the free rider. Let's discuss this problem in the next slide. A free rider could be defined as someone who enjoys the benefits of a good without paying for it. Free riding is possible if the consumption of a good is characterized by non-excludability. Thus, it is possible to free ride for public goods since they are non-excludable. The free rider problem arises at the absence of an incentive for people to pay for what they consume. Because of the free rider problem, private provision leads to the production of less than the efficient quantity of a public good. Due to the consumption indivisibility and non-excludability characteristics of the public good, consumers receive the value of any diversity purchased by other people. Thus, incentives to finance and to produce efficient amount of these goods are not enough. For this reason, such a good would be undersupplied. In the previous lecture, we have discussed externalities as a source of market failure. So, what can governments do to improve the situation? Is the government intervention always successful? Or can you think of examples where the government intervention has made the situation worse? Well, government intervention is not always successful. Government failure is likely to occur for many reasons. So, what is meant by government failure, and what are the main reasons of government failure? Government failure could be defined as a situation in which government intervention in an economy worsens outcomes. There are many reasons behind government failure. For example, the government may come under pressures from certain groups in the society, and thus the government acts in the interests of these groups rather than in the interests of the society. Another reason behind government failure is likely to be the lack of information. Lack of information results in not making the best policy decisions. Moreover, politicians may not have the goal of maximizing their society's welfare. An example of the government failure that has resulted in environmental harm is the Common Agriculture Policy of the European Union. This policy is based upon supporting farmers' incomes through the use of high product prices. Such a policy has resulted in overproduction and intensive farming, leading to a loss of surface and groundwater, overgrazing, etc. Another example for government failure that has resulted in environmental degradation is energy subsidies. Subsidizing energy tends to result in inefficient use of energy and thus more pollutant emissions to the air. Over time, the scale of economic activity and the resulting emissions have increased. Cities are experiencing severe problems from air and water pollutants because of the clustering of activities. As a result, pollutant concentrations have caused severe problems with human health and vegetation growth. The level and the concentration of economic activity has increased pollution problems and driven up the demand for clean air and pristine areas. These changes have created the preconditions for government action. So, a relevant question might be, can government respond efficiently, or will lobbying prevent efficient political solutions? We will answer this question later during the current course. The next slide displays key concepts and terms which have been introduced during the current lecture. Kindly spend enough time in studying these concepts and terms. This is the end of today's recorded lecture. Thank you.